aita for refusing to let my cousin stay with me after she ruined my wedding. I, 30F, have a cousin, Emily, 28F, who's always been the center of attention in our family. She's the kind of person who can't stand it when the spotlight isn't on her. Growing up, Emily was the golden child, pretty, popular, and always the life of the party. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, bookish one who preferred to stay in the background. Emily loved to remind me of that, often making snide comments about my clothes, my hobbies, or my lack of a social life. It wasn't just harmless teasing, it was relentless and often cruel. One memory that still stings is from my 16th birthday. I'd invited a few close friends over for a small party, and Emily showed up uninvited. She brought a group of her friends with her, and they spent the entire night making fun of my decorations, my music, and even the cake my mom had made. By the end of the night, I was in tears, and Emily just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, lighten up. It's just a joke." That was Emily in a nutshell, always the star of the show, no matter who got hurt in the process. Fast forward to last year. I was getting married to the love of my life, James, 31M. We'd been together for 5 years, and the wedding was everything I'd ever dreamed of, a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. I was hesitant to invite Emily because of her history of causing drama, but my mom insisted it would be family drama if I didn't invite her. "She's your cousin," my mom said. "You can't exclude her from such an important day." Reluctantly, I agreed. The wedding itself was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, and I was over the moon. James and I exchanged vows, and I felt like I was floating on air. But everything changed at the reception. Emily showed up wearing a white dress, yes, white, and immediately started making inappropriate toasts. One of them was a joke about how James was a downgrade from my ex-boyfriend. I tried to brush it off, but then she accidentally spilled red wine on my wedding dress. While I was in the bathroom trying to clean it, she grabbed the microphone and announced her own engagement to her boyfriend of 3 months. The entire reception shifted focus to her, and my wedding was completely derailed. I was furious. I confronted her afterward, but she just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, come on, it was just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" I cut her out of my life after that. I didn't invite her to any future family gatherings, and I made it clear to my parents that I wanted nothing to do with her. Fast forward to now, Emily's going through a messy divorce. Her husband left her for someone else, and she's struggling financially. She reached out to me, asking if she could stay with me for a few months while she gets back on her feet. I said no without hesitation. I told her I couldn't trust her after what she did at my wedding, and that I didn't feel comfortable having her in my home. Now my family is calling me heartless. They say Emily is family and that I should forgive her because she's going through a tough time. My mom even said, "You're being petty by holding a grudge over one bad night." But to me, it wasn't just one bad night. It was my wedding, a day I can never get back. I've spent years trying to move past the hurt she caused me, and I don't think I owe her anything. Some of my friends are on my side, saying I have every right to set boundaries, but others think I'm being too harsh. One friend said, "She's family, and family forgives." But I don't know if I can forgive her, let alone let her into my home. To make matters worse, Emily has been posting about her situation on social media, painting herself as the victim. She's shared vague posts about family turning their backs on you when you need them most, and some of our mutual friends have started messaging me, urging me to be the bigger person. It's exhausting, and I'm starting to question if I'm being too harsh. But then I think about everything she's put me through, not just at the wedding, but all the years of bullying and belittling. I don't know if I can open my home to someone who's caused me so much pain. Aita for refusing to let her stay with me? Update. After posting this, I talked to James about it, and he's fully supportive of my decision. He reminded me that I've worked hard to set boundaries with my family, and I shouldn't feel guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. He also pointed out that Emily has never truly apologized or taken responsibility for her actions. Her apology was more of a "sorry you feel that way" kind of thing. I also reached out to my therapist, who helped me unpack my feelings. She reminded me that forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let someone back into my life, especially if they haven't shown genuine remorse or changed their behavior. That conversation gave me a lot of clarity, and I feel more confident in my decision. As for my family, I've decided to set firmer boundaries with them too. I told my mom that while I understand she wants to keep the peace, I need her to respect my decision. It's not easy, but I'm learning to prioritize my own mental health. Am I the asshole for telling my best friend she can't bring her service dog to my wedding? My best friend, Sarah, 29F, has been my ride or die since college. We met during freshman orientation, and we've been inseparable ever since. She's the kind of friend who shows up with ice cream and wine when you've had a bad day, and she's always the first to celebrate your wins. Over the years, we've been through everything together. Breakups, job losses, family drama, you name it. Sarah is more like a sister to me than a friend. A few years ago, Sarah was diagnosed with severe anxiety and PTSD after a traumatic event. It was a really difficult time for her, and she struggled to leave the house or even function day to day. That's when she got Max, her service dog. Max is a golden retriever, and he's been a lifesaver for Sarah. He's trained to help her through panic attacks, provide emotional support, and even remind her to take her medication. Max isn't just a pet, he's a crucial part of Sarah's life. Fast forward to now, I'm getting married in a few months to my fiancé, Mark, 31M. Mark and I have been together for 4 years, and I'm so excited to start this new chapter of my life. Sarah is one of my bridesmaids, and I couldn't imagine getting married without her by my side. But there's one problem. Mark is severely allergic to dogs, like EpiPen-level allergic. Even being in the same room as a dog can trigger a reaction, and it's something we've had to navigate carefully throughout our relationship. When I first started planning the wedding, I knew Max would be an issue. I love Max, and I'm so grateful for everything he's done for Sarah. But I also don't want my fiancé to spend our wedding day in the hospital. I tried to come up with a compromise. I offered to pay for a professional dog sitter to watch Max during the wedding, or even rent a hotel room nearby where Max could stay with a trusted caregiver. I thought this was a fair solution. Sarah would still have access to Max if she needed him, but Mark wouldn't be at risk. But Sarah wasn't having it. She said Max is non-negotiable and that she can't function without him. She accused me of being ableist and not understanding her needs. Max isn't just a dog, she said. He's my lifeline. If you really cared about me, you'd make this work. I felt terrible. I don't want to exclude Sarah or make her feel unsupported, but I also don't want to put Mark's health at risk. I tried to explain this to Sarah, but she wasn't willing to budge. She's now threatening to skip the wedding altogether, and some of our mutual friends are saying I'm being unreasonable. One friend said, "It's just one day. Can't Mark take an allergy pill or something?" But it's not that simple. Mark's allergies are severe, and even with medication, being around a dog for an extended period of time could be dangerous. I don't want to risk his health, but I also don't want to lose Sarah over this. I'm torn. On one hand, I understand how important Max is to Sarah, and I don't want to make her feel like her needs don't matter. On the other hand, this is my wedding, and I want my fiancé to be able to enjoy it without worrying about an allergic reaction. AETA for telling Sarah she can't bring Max to the wedding. Update. After posting this, I had a long conversation with Mark about the situation. He's been incredibly understanding and supportive, but he also made it clear that his health has to come first. He suggested we look into other options, like having Max stay in a separate room at the venue with a caregiver, so Sarah could check on him if needed. We even reached out to the venue to see if this was possible, but they said their policy doesn't allow dogs on the premises, even in separate areas. I also talked to Sarah again, trying to find a middle ground. I offered to help her find a therapist or support person who could be with her during the wedding in place of Max, but she said it wouldn't be the same. Max knows me better than anyone, she said. I can't just replace him. It's been a really difficult situation, and I'm still not sure what to do. Some of my friends have suggested I uninvite Sarah altogether, but that feels like a last resort. She's been such an important part of my life, and I don't want to lose her over this. At the same time, I can't risk Mark's health, and I feel like Sarah isn't willing to compromise. Am I the asshole for refusing to split my inheritance with my step-siblings? When my dad passed away last year, it was one of the hardest moments of my life. He was my rock, my biggest supporter, and the person I turned to for advice. We were incredibly close, and his death left a huge void in my life. He was only 58, and his passing was sudden, a heart attack that no one saw coming. It's been a year, and I'm still struggling to come to terms with it. After his death, we found out that he had left everything to me, 25F, in his will. His second wife, Linda, my stepmom, and her 2 kids, my step-siblings Jake and Mia, got nothing. My dad and I had always been close, and he made it clear in his will that he wanted me to have his estate. He left me the house, his savings, and his investments. In the will, he wrote, "I want my daughter to have everything because she's the only one who's always been there for me." At first, I was touched by his words, but I also felt a lot of pressure. I didn't want to cause any family drama, so I tried to handle everything as delicately as possible. But when Linda, Jake, and Mia found out about the will, they were furious. They argued that they were part of his life too and deserved a share of the inheritance. Linda said, "Your father loved us just as much as he loved you. This isn't fair." I tried to explain that I was just following my dad's wishes, but they weren't having it. Jake accused me of manipulating my dad into leaving everything to me, and Mia said I was being greedy. They've been pressuring me to split the inheritance fairly, but I've refused. Now they're calling me selfish and saying I'm tearing the family apart. The truth is, my relationship with Linda and my step-siblings has always been complicated. My dad married Linda when I was 12, and I never really bonded with her or her kids. Jake and Mia were always closer to each other than they were to me, and Linda made it clear early on that I wasn't her priority. She never outright mistreated me, but I always felt like an outsider in my own home. My dad knew this, and I think that's why he left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of, especially since I'm his only biological child. But now I'm being painted as the villain for honoring his wishes. Some of my friends are on my side, saying I have every right to keep the inheritance, but others think I should share it, especially since Jake and Mia are struggling financially. Jake recently lost his job, and Mia is a single mom trying to make ends meet. I feel guilty knowing that the money could help them, but I also don't want to go against my dad's wishes. I've tried to compromise by offering to help them out financially in other ways, like paying for Jake's job training or helping Mia with her kids' school expenses, but they've rejected these offers, saying it's not enough. They want a full share of the inheritance, and they're not willing to settle for less. I'm torn. On one hand, I want to honor my dad's wishes and keep the inheritance. On the other hand, I don't want to cause a permanent rift in the family. Aita for refusing to split the inheritance with my step-siblings. Update. After posting this, I had a long conversation with my dad's lawyer to make sure I was handling everything correctly. He reassured me that my dad's will was clear and legally binding, and that I wasn't obligated to share the inheritance if I didn't want to. He also suggested I set up a trust for Jake and Mia if I wanted to help them financially without giving them a direct share of the estate. I also talked to my mom, my dad's first wife, about the situation. She's been incredibly supportive and reminded me that my dad made his decision for a reason. He wanted you to have that money because he knew you'd use it wisely, she said. Don't let anyone guilt you into giving it up. As for Linda, Jake, and Mia, I've decided to set firmer boundaries. I told them that while I'm willing to help them in other ways, I won't be splitting the inheritance. It wasn't an easy conversation, and they're still upset, but I feel like I'm doing the right thing by honoring my dad's wishes. Am I the asshole for telling my mom she can't move in with me after she kicked me out as a teen? When I was 16, my mom kicked me out of the house. It's a memory that still haunts me, even though it's been over a decade. The reason? She didn't approve of my boyfriend at the time, Mike. Mike was 18, and my mom thought he was a bad influence. She said I was making bad choices and that I needed to learn the hard way. So one night, after a huge fight, she told me to pack my bags and leave. I was still in high school, and I had nowhere to go. I ended up couch surfing for months, staying with friends and their families. It was humiliating and terrifying. I worked multiple part-time jobs to support myself, and I barely managed to graduate high school. Mike and I broke up not long after, and I was completely on my own. It took years of hard work, but I eventually built a stable life for myself. I went to college, got a good job, and now, at 28, I'm financially independent and living in a nice apartment in the city. Fast forward to now, my mom is facing financial difficulties. She lost her job a few months ago, and she's struggling to pay her bills. She reached out to me, asking if she could move in with me for a while until she gets back on her feet. I was shocked. After everything she put me through, I never expected her to ask me for help. I told her no. I said I couldn't forget what she did to me and that I didn't feel comfortable having her in my home. She was furious. She accused me of holding a grudge and said, "I'm your mother, you owe me." But I don't feel like I owe her anything. She abandoned me when I needed her most, and now she expects me to take care of her? My mom has been guilt-tripping me nonstop since then. She's been calling and texting, saying things like, "I raised you, and this is how you repay me," and "You're being selfish and ungrateful." She's even reached out to other family members, and now they're pressuring me to let her move in. My aunt called me and said, "She's your mom. You can't turn your back on her." But I don't see it that way. To me, she turned her back on me first. I've spent years trying to heal from the trauma she caused me, and I don't know if I can open my home to her after everything that happened. At the same time, I feel guilty. She's my mom, and she's struggling. AET for refusing to let her move in. Update. After posting this, I had a long conversation with my therapist about the situation. She helped me unpack my feelings and reminded me that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. She also suggested I think about what I would need from my mom in order to rebuild our relationship, if that's something I even want. I also talked to my mom again, trying to explain why I feel the way I do. I told her that what she did when I was 16 had a lasting impact on me, and that I need time to process everything before I can even think about having her in my life again. She didn't take it well. She accused me of being dramatic and said, "It was years ago. Why can't you just let it go?" Her reaction made me realize that she hasn't really taken responsibility for what she did. She still sees herself as the victim, and that's not something I'm willing to tolerate. I've decided to keep my distance for now, even though it's been hard. Some of my friends have suggested I help her find other resources, like affordable housing or job training programs, and I'm considering that as a compromise. Am I the asshole for refusing to apologize to my neighbor after her kid broke into my house? I 30UF. Live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone pretty much keeps to themselves. It's the kind of place where you wave to your neighbors, but don't really know them beyond that. My next-door neighbors, the Millers, have always been friendly enough, but their 10-year-old son, Ethan, is a handful. He's the kind of kid who's always getting into trouble, throwing rocks at cars, trampling flower beds, and generally causing chaos. His parents never seem to discipline him, and it's been a source of frustration for me and some of the other neighbors. A few weeks ago, I came home from work to find my front door wide open. At first, I thought I'd forgotten to lock it, but when I went inside, I realized something was very wrong. My living room was trashed. My laptop was missing. A vase my grandmother had given me was shattered on the floor, and there were scribbles all over my walls in permanent marker. I was horrified. I called the police, and they started investigating. The next day, one of my other neighbors told me she'd seen Ethan sneaking around my house earlier that afternoon. I confronted Ethan's mom, Mrs. Miller, and she admitted that Ethan had been at my house. She said he'd been curious and that he didn't mean any harm. She even tried to downplay it, saying, "He's just a kid. Kids do stupid things sometimes." I was furious. I told her that this wasn't just a stupid thing. It was breaking and entering, vandalism, and theft. I said I expected her to pay for the damages and replace my laptop. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal." The police ended up talking to Ethan, and he admitted to breaking into my house. They gave him a warning, but because of his age, there wasn't much else they could do. Mrs. Miller was furious with me for involving the police. She said I was ruining her son's future, and that I should have just talked to her instead of calling the cops. A few days later, she showed up at my door with a half-hearted apology and a demand that I apologize to Ethan for traumatizing him by calling the police. I refused. I told her that her son needed to learn that actions have consequences and that I wasn't going to apologize for protecting my property. Now the Millers have been spreading rumors about me in the neighborhood, saying I'm heartless and out to get their kid. Some of my neighbors have even started avoiding me, and I've heard whispers that I'm being too hard on Ethan, but I don't think I'm in the wrong here. Aita for refusing to apologize? Update. After posting this, I decided to take legal action to recover the cost of the damages. I filed a small claims lawsuit against the Millers, and they were ordered to pay for my laptop and the repairs to my home. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it felt like a win. I also talked to some of my other neighbors about what happened, and a few of them admitted that they've had issues with Ethan too. One neighbor said he's caught Ethan stealing packages from his porch, and another said Ethan has been bullying her kids at the bus stop. It seems like the Millers have been turning a blind eye to their son's behavior for a long time, and it's finally catching up to them. As for the Millers, they've been giving me the cold shoulder, but I'm okay with that. I've decided to keep my distance and focus on protecting my property. I've installed security cameras and motion sensor lights, and I'm considering getting a fence. It's not the neighborly relationship I hoped for, but at least I feel safer. Am I the asshole for telling my friend she can't bring her new boyfriend to my destination wedding? I, 30F, am getting married in a few months, and I couldn't be more excited. My fiancé, Alex, 32M, and I have been planning this wedding for over a year, and we've decided to have a destination wedding in Bali. It's going to be a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and family. We've worked hard to keep the guest list small, and we've made it clear that we're not inviting plus ones unless they're in a serious, long-term relationship. One of my closest friends, Sarah, 29F, has been dating a guy named Jake for about 2 months. They met on a dating app, and while they seem happy together, I don't know Jake very well. When Sarah asked if she could bring him to the wedding, I told her no. I explained that we were trying to keep the guest list small, and that we weren't inviting casual partners. I thought she would understand, but she was furious. Sarah accused me of being controlling and said I was ruining her experience of my wedding. She said, "I've been there for you through everything, and this is how you repay me?" I tried to explain that it wasn't personal, but she wasn't having it. She's now threatening to boycott the wedding altogether, and some of our mutual friends are saying I'm being unreasonable. I feel terrible. Sarah is one of my closest friends, and I don't want to lose her over this, but at the same time, I don't think it's fair for me to make exceptions to our wedding rules just because she's upset. Aita for telling Sarah she can't bring Jake to my wedding. Update. After posting this, I had a long conversation with Sarah about how I was feeling. I told her that while I love her and want her to be part of my wedding, I need her to respect my decisions. I also explained that the wedding is about Alex and me, and that we've made these rules to keep the day intimate and special. Sarah eventually came around and apologized for overreacting. She said she was just excited about Jake and wanted to share the experience with him, but she understood why I felt the way I did. We've since made up, and she's back on board with the wedding plans. Am I the asshole for telling my friend she can't bring her new boyfriend to my destination wedding? 30F. I'm getting married in a few months, and I couldn't be more excited. My fiancé, Alex, 32Ms, and I have been planning this wedding for over a year, and we've decided to have a destination wedding in Bali. It's going to be a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and family. We've worked hard to keep the guest list small, and we've made it clear that we're not inviting plus ones unless they're in a serious, long-term relationship. One of my closest friends, Sarah, 29F, has been dating a guy named Jake for about 2 months. They met on a dating app, and while they seem happy together, I don't know Jake very well. When Sarah asked if she could bring him to the wedding, I told her no. I explained that we were trying to keep the guest list small and that we weren't inviting casual partners. I thought she would understand, but she was furious. Sarah accused me of being controlling and said I was ruining her experience of my wedding. She said, "I've been there for you through everything, and this is how you repay me?" I tried to explain that it wasn't personal, but she wasn't having it. She's now threatening to boycott the wedding altogether, and some of our mutual friends are saying I'm being unreasonable. I feel terrible. Sarah is one of my closest friends, and I don't want to lose her over this. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair for me to make exceptions to our wedding rules just because she's upset. Aita for telling Sarah she can't bring Jake to my wedding. After posting this, I had a long conversation with Sarah about how I was feeling. I told her that while I love her and want her to be part of my wedding, I need her to respect my decisions. I also explained that the wedding is about Alex and me, and that we've made these rules to keep the day intimate and special. Sarah eventually came around and apologized for overreacting. She said she was just excited about Jake and wanted to share the experience with him, but she understood why I felt the way I did. We've since made up, and she's back on board with the wedding plans. The situation with Sarah has been a recurring issue in our friendship. She's always been the type of person who wants to include her significant other in everything, even if it's not appropriate. I've tried to be understanding, but it's hard not to feel like she's prioritizing her relationship over our friendship. One of the most frustrating things is the way Sarah seems to think that her relationship is more important than my wedding. She's been talking nonstop about Jake and how much she wants him to be part of this special day, but she doesn't seem to understand that the day is about Alex and me, not her and Jake. I've tried to talk to Sarah about how all of this makes me feel, but she doesn't seem to get it. She says things like, "You're being too controlling," and "it's just one person." But it's not just about Jake. It's about the way Sarah seems to think that her wants and needs are more important than mine. The wedding situation was the last straw for me. I told Sarah that if she couldn't respect my decisions, then I didn't know if our friendship could survive. It was a hard conversation, but it needed to happen. Sarah finally agreed to come to the wedding without Jake, but she's still not happy about it. In the end, I'm hopeful that Sarah will come around and see things from my perspective. I love her, and I want her to be part of my wedding, but I also need her to respect my boundaries. It's not the outcome I wanted, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction. Am I the asshole for cutting off my best friend after she betrayed me at the worst moment of my life? I, 31F, have been best friends with Claire, 31F, since we were in kindergarten. We've been through everything together. First crushes, heartbreaks, college, career struggles, you name it. Claire was the kind of friend who would drop everything to be there for you, and I always thought our bond was unbreakable. That is until recently. A year ago, my life fell apart. My husband, Mark, 33M, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. It was devastating. We had just gotten married 2 years prior, and we were planning to start a family. Instead, we were thrown into a nightmare of hospital visits, treatments, and endless uncertainty. Claire was my rock during this time. She stayed with me at the hospital, helped me with household chores, and even took time off work to support me. I truly believed I couldn't have gotten through it without her. Mark passed away 6 months ago. I was, and still am, completely shattered. Claire was there for me in the immediate aftermath, helping me plan the funeral and making sure I ate and slept. But about a month after Mark's death, something changed. Claire started acting distant. She would cancel plans last minute, ignore my texts, and when we did talk, she seemed distracted and uninterested. I chalked it up to her own stress. She was dealing with a demanding job and a rocky relationship, and tried not to take it personally. Then, 2 months ago, I found out the truth. My sister, Emily, told me that Claire had been seeing someone new, a guy named Ryan. At first, I was happy for her. Claire had been single for a while, and I thought it was great that she was moving on. But then Emily dropped the bombshell. Ryan was Mark's best friend. Not only that, but Claire and Ryan had started seeing each other while Mark was still alive. I was in shock. I confronted Claire, and she admitted it was true. She said it had started as a casual thing, just texting and hanging out, but it had turned into something more. She claimed it wasn't serious at first, and that she didn't want to tell me because I was already dealing with so much. But the more she talked, the angrier I got. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me and Mark like that? I told Claire I needed space, and that I couldn't be friends with her anymore. She was devastated. She begged me to forgive her, saying she never meant to hurt me and that she loved me like a sister. But I couldn't get past the betrayal. It felt like she had stabbed me in the back at the worst possible time. Now, Claire has been reaching out nonstop, trying to apologize and make things right. She's even shown up at my house uninvited, crying and begging for another chance. Some of our mutual friends are saying I'm being too harsh and that I should forgive her because she was there for me when Mark was sick. But I can't. Every time I think about what she did, I feel sick to my stomach. After posting this, I had a long conversation with my therapist about the situation. She helped me unpack my feelings and reminded me that it's okay to set boundaries, even with people you love. She also suggested I think about what I would need from Claire in order to rebuild our friendship, if that's something I even want. I also talked to Claire again, trying to explain why I feel the way I do. I told her that what she did had a lasting impact on me and that I need time to process everything before I can even think about having her in my life again. She didn't take it well. She accused me of being dramatic and said, "It was months ago. Why can't you just let it go?" Her reaction made me realize that she hasn't really taken responsibility for what she did. She still sees herself as the victim, and that's not something I'm willing to tolerate. I've decided to keep my distance for now, even though it's been hard. Some of my friends have suggested I help her find other resources like affordable housing or job training programs, and I'm considering that as a compromise. The situation with Claire has been a recurring issue in my life. It's not just about the betrayal. It's about the way she seems to think that her actions don't have consequences. She's always been the type of person who wants to include her significant other in everything, even if it's not appropriate. I've tried to be understanding, but it's hard not to feel like she's prioritizing her relationship over our friendship. One of the most frustrating things is the way Claire seems to think that her relationship is more important than my grief. She's been talking nonstop about Ryan and how much she wants him to be part of this special day, but she doesn't seem to understand that the day is about Alex and me, not her and Jake. I've tried to talk to Claire about how all of this makes me feel, but she doesn't seem to get it. She says things like, "You're being too controlling, and it's just one person." But it's not just about Jake. It's about the way Claire seems to think that her wants and needs are more important than mine. The wedding situation was the last straw for me. I told Claire that if she couldn't respect my decisions, then I didn't know if our friendship could survive. It was a hard conversation, but it needed to happen. Claire finally agreed to come to the wedding without Jake, but she's still not happy about it. In the end, I'm hopeful that Claire will come around and see things from my perspective. I love her, and I want her to be part of my wedding, but I also need her to respect my boundaries. It's not the outcome I wanted, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction. Am I the asshole for exposing my sister's affair at her wedding? I, 28F, have always had a complicated relationship with my older sister, Jessica, 30F. Growing up, Jessica was the golden child, smart, beautiful, and effortlessly popular. I, on the other hand, was the awkward, nerdy younger sister who always felt like I was living in her shadow. Despite our differences, we've always been close, or at least I thought we were. Jessica got engaged to her longtime boyfriend, Daniel, 31M, last year. Daniel is a great guy, kind, funny, and genuinely in love with Jessica. Their wedding was supposed to be the event of the year, and I was honored to be Jessica's maid of honor. I helped her plan every detail, from the flowers to the seating chart, and I was genuinely excited to see her marry the man of her dreams. But then, 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out something that shattered everything. I was at Jessica's apartment helping her pack for the honeymoon when her phone buzzed. It was a text from a guy named Ryan. The message was explicit, to say the least. I was shocked. I confronted Jessica, and she broke down. She admitted that she'd been having an affair with Ryan for the past 6 months. She said it was a mistake and that she loved Daniel, but she couldn't help herself. I was furious. How could she do this to Daniel? How could she betray him like this, especially when they were about to get married? I told Jessica she needed to come clean to Daniel, but she refused. She said it would ruin everything and that she couldn't bear to hurt him. She begged me to keep her secret, saying, "You're my sister. You have to support me. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, Jessica was my sister, and I didn't want to betray her trust. On the other hand, I couldn't stand by and let Daniel marry her without knowing the truth. I spent the next 2 weeks agonizing over what to do. Tried to convince Jessica to tell Daniel herself, but she wouldn't budge. The day of the wedding arrived, and I still hadn't made a decision. I stood by Jessica's side as she got ready, feeling sick to my stomach. When it was time for the ceremony, I couldn't take it anymore. As the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, I stood up and said, "I do." The entire room went silent. I looked at Daniel and said, "Jessica has been having an affair. She's been lying to you this whole time." The fallout was immediate. Jessica burst into tears. Daniel looked like he'd been punched in the gut, and the guests were in shock. Jessica screamed at me, calling me a traitor and saying I'd ruined her life. Daniel called off the wedding on the spot, and Jessica hasn't spoken to me since. Now my family is divided. Some of them think I did the right thing by exposing Jessica's affair, while others think I should have stayed out of it. My parents are furious with me, saying I should have kept Jessica's secret, no matter what. Jessica has been posting about me on social media, calling me a backstabbing liar and saying I've always been jealous of her. I feel terrible about how everything turned out, but I also don't think I could have lived with myself if I'd let Daniel marry Jessica without knowing the truth. Aita for exposing my sister's affair at her wedding? After posting this, I had a long conversation with Daniel. He thanked me for telling him the truth, even though it was painful to hear. He said he couldn't imagine marrying someone who would betray him like that, and he's grateful that I saved him from making a huge mistake. As for Jessica, she's still not speaking to me. My parents have been pressuring me to apologize to her, but I don't think I've done anything wrong. I've decided to keep my distance from Jessica for now, even though it's been hard. Some of my friends have suggested I reach out to her and try to mend our relationship, but I'm not ready yet. The situation with Jessica has been a recurring issue in our relationship. It's not just about the affair, it's about the way she seems to think that her actions don't have consequences. She's always been the type of person who wants to include her significant other in everything, even if it's not appropriate. I've tried to be understanding, but it's hard not to feel like she's prioritizing her relationship over our friendship. One of the most frustrating things is the way Jessica seems to think that her relationship is more important than my grief. She's been talking nonstop about Ryan and how much she wants him to be part of this special day, but she doesn't seem to understand that the day is about Alex and me, not her and Jake. I've tried to talk to Jessica about how all of this makes me feel, but she doesn't seem to get it. She says things like, "You're being too controlling," and "It's just one person." But it's not just about Jake. It's about the way Jessica seems to think that her wants and needs are more important than mine. Am I the asshole for letting you know I am divorcing you by sending you a thread on the website if she couldn't respect my decisions, then I didn't know if our friendship could survive. Stefan has seen this. It was a hard conversation. He is mad that apparently one of you found him based on the rate my Jessica finally agreed to. He has deleted his account. Come to the wedding without Jake. For any purposes, but she's still not happy about it. I want to clarify that I left out any actual incriminating information that Jessica will come around and see things from my perspective. Any and all people who are pretending to know me and I want have any incriminating information about me. But I also need her to respect. I am not from South Carolina. It's not the outcome. I'm not moving in with any other guy, I feel like it's a step in the right direction. And I am also not sleeping around. Hi, Stefan. Maybe you will finally listen. And if you're wondering if you can just speed home and stop me from doing this and leaving, it's too late. I'm sending you this after I've already loaded everything in the car and left. Don't worry. I spoke with our landlords and took my name off the lease. I've set up a direct deposit for the next month's rent. After that, you're on your own, buddy. I guess you're wondering why. I'm guessing you'll act like you're completely blindsided, right? Because you've done absolutely nothing wrong, and you're a great husband and father to be. Aren't you? Well, buddy, let me break it down for you in a language you understand. I, 29F, have been married to my husband, 35M, for 5 years, and we've been together for nearly 10. On paper, everything seemed fine, but in reality, our marriage has been anything but. I've reached my breaking point, and I need to know if I'm the one in the wrong here. From the beginning, my MIL has been a nightmare. She made everything about her from day one. At our wedding, she wore white, claiming it was a family tradition. It wasn't. She constantly criticizes me, from my cooking to my appearance. I'll never forget the time she called me fat at a family gathering, right in front of everyone. And what did my husband do? Nothing. Not a single word to defend me. It didn't stop there. She has accidentally destroyed my belongings, including my grandmother's necklace, which she threw out because it looked like cheap costume jewelry. She's gone out of her way to make me feel small and unwelcome in my own home, but every time I tried to talk to my husband about it, he'd brush it off, saying I was overreacting or being too emotional. And then there's my husband. He's always on Reddit, constantly giving strangers relationship advice, which is laughable considering how he treats me. He spends more time rating women's boobs on Reddit than talking to me, literally. And just so you know, the last pair he rated weren't a 4 out of 10, they were a 10 out of 10. Yeah, he's got plenty of time to do that, but can't be bothered to remember anything about my life. He'll forget my birthday, our anniversary, even simple things like what I'm working on or what's important to me, but he has a perfect memory for his work schedule and things that matter to him. When we fight, he becomes incredibly hostile and always throws in a sarcastic buddy at the end of his sentences, like I'm some acquaintance he can barely tolerate. And he never cleans. The house, the dishes, laundry, you name it, it's all on me. It's like he thinks being an adult is optional, as long as he's got his job and his Reddit account. The final straw came a few weeks ago. I'm 5 months pregnant with our first child, a daughter. My mill started making comments about how she'll have to whip the girl into shape and how she'll raise her to be tough because I'm too soft. When I told my husband that I didn't want his mother to have too much influence on our daughter, especially with the way she treats me, he just laughed it off, saying his mother means well and that I was overthinking it. But the moment that truly broke me was when we were talking about future childcare, and my husband suggested that his mother should watch our daughter while we work. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that, especially considering how his mother treats me, and he snapped. He called me paranoid and said I should get over it because his mother was going to be a big part of our daughter's life, whether I liked it or not. This is the same woman who believes corporal punishment is okay. I've seen her hit my husband's nephew for the smallest things, and no one does anything about it. It's like they're all living in some kind of cult, and I'm finally waking up to the reality of what's going on. If he wouldn't stand up for me, how could I expect him to stand up for our child? I started to fear for what kind of environment our daughter would grow up in. A place where she might be belittled or bullied by her own grandmother, with a father who wouldn't do anything to stop it. Oh, and did I mention that he missed our first ultrasound? His mother needed him to help her with something urgent. It turned out to be fixing her Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi. He chose that over seeing our daughter for the first time. That told me everything I needed to know about where I stand in his life. So, I packed up and left. I'm done living like this. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I've already contacted a lawyer. You can't scare me into complying anymore, because I have all those texts. You know exactly which ones I'm talking about. So, Stefan, I wish you all the best in your future marriage, with your mother and the women of Reddit whose boobs you don't even deserve. Am I the asshole for leaving my husband after he neglected me for years, let his mother mistreat me and made me fear for our future daughter's safety? Am I the asshole for cutting off my parents after they refused to support me during my divorce? I, 32F, have always had a rocky relationship with my parents. They're very traditional and have always had high expectations for me. Get good grades, marry a successful man, have kids, and live the perfect life. I did my best to meet those expectations, but it never felt like enough. No matter what I did, they always found something to criticize. 3 years ago, I married my now ex-husband, Greg, 34M. Greg was everything my parents wanted: successful, ambitious, and from a good family. But behind closed doors, our marriage was a nightmare. Greg was emotionally abusive, controlling, and manipulative. He would belittle me, isolate me from my friends, and make me feel like I was worthless. I tried to make it work for as long as I could, but eventually, I realized I couldn't live like that anymore. When I told my parents I was filing for divorce, they were furious. They said I was throwing away a good man and that I needed to work harder to save my marriage. They refused to believe that Greg was abusive and accused me of exaggerating. My mom even said, "All marriages have problems. You're just being selfish." I was devastated. I had hoped my parents would support me during one of the hardest times of my life, but instead, they sided with Greg. They invited him over for dinner, called him to check on him, and even offered to help him find a lawyer. Meanwhile, they barely spoke to me. When I tried to explain how much their behavior hurt me, they said I was being dramatic and that I needed to get over it. The final straw came when my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced and tried to convince me to drop the divorce. They said I was embarrassing the family and that I needed to think about how my actions would reflect on them. I told them to leave and that I didn't want to see them until they could support me. They haven't spoken to me since. Now, some of my extended family members are reaching out saying I'm being too harsh on my parents. They say my parents are just worried about me and that I should forgive them because they're family. But I don't think I can. I feel like they chose Greg over me, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust them again. Am I the asshole for cutting off my parents after they refused to support me during my divorce? After posting this, I had a long conversation with my therapist about the situation. She helped me unpack my feelings and reminded me that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. She also suggested I think about what I would need from my parents in order to rebuild our relationship, if that's something I even want. I also talked to my parents again, trying to explain why I feel the way I do. I told them that their lack of support during my divorce had a lasting impact on me and that I need time to process everything before I can even think about having them in my life again. They didn't take it well. They accused me of being dramatic and said, "It was months ago. Why can't you just let it go?" Their reaction made me realize that they haven't really taken responsibility for what they did. They still see themselves as the victims, and that's not something I'm willing to tolerate. I've decided to keep my distance for now, even though it's been hard. Some of my friends have suggested I help them find other resources, like affordable housing or job training programs, and I'm considering that as a compromise. The situation with my parents has been a recurring issue in my life. It's not just about the divorce. It's about the way they've always prioritized their image over my well-being. Growing up, I was constantly compared to my cousins, who were all perfect in my parents' eyes. If I got a B instead of an A, they would lecture me for hours. If I didn't want to go to a family event, they would guilt trip me until I gave in. It was exhausting, and it made me feel like I was never good enough. When I married Greg, I thought I was finally giving them what they wanted. But even then, it wasn't enough. They would criticize the way I kept the house, the way I dressed, and even the way I interacted with Greg. Nothing I did was ever right. The divorce was the breaking point for me. I had hoped that, for once, my parents would put me first. But instead, they doubled down on their criticism and made me feel like I was the problem. It was like they cared more about what people would think than about my happiness. I've tried to talk to my parents about how all of this makes me feel, but they don't seem to get it. They say things like, "We just want what's best for you," and "You're being too sensitive." But it's not just about the divorce. It's about the way they've always treated me, and the way they've always put their own needs above mine. Cutting them off was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I feel like it was the right one. I'm finally starting to heal and rebuild my life, and I don't want their negativity dragging me down. It's not the outcome I wanted, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction. Am I the asshole for telling my husband the truth about his father after 10 years of marriage? I, 35F, have been married to my husband, Tom, 37M, for 10 years. We have a strong relationship built on trust, love, and mutual respect, or at least I thought we did. But recently, I found out a secret that has shaken me to my core, and I'm not sure if I did the right thing by telling Tom. Here's the backstory. Tom's father, Richard, passed away 5 years ago. He was a well-respected man in our community, a successful businessman, a devoted husband, and a loving father. Tom adored him and has always spoken about him with nothing but pride and admiration. Richard was the kind of man who seemed larger than life, and Tom has spent years trying to live up to his legacy. A few weeks ago, I was going through some old boxes in the attic when I found a stack of letters. They were addressed to Richard, and they were from a woman named Margaret. At first, I thought they might be from an old friend or relative, but as I started reading, I realized they were love letters. Margaret was writing to Richard about their affair, how much she loved him, how she couldn't wait to see him again, and how she wished they could be together openly. The letters spanned over a decade, and it was clear that Richard had been leading a double life. I was stunned. I had no idea Richard was capable of something like this. He had always seemed so devoted to Tom's mother, and I couldn't believe he had been cheating on her for years. I didn't know what to do. Should I tell Tom? Should I keep the secret, to protect his memory of his father? I agonized over it for days, but in the end, I decided Tom deserved to know the truth. When I told him, he was devastated. He couldn't believe his father, his hero, had been living a lie. He was angry, hurt, and confused, and he lashed out at me for telling him. He said, "Why did you have to tell me this? Why couldn't you just let me remember him the way he was?" I tried to explain that I thought he deserved to know the truth, but he wasn't having it. He accused me of trying to ruin his memories of his father and said I should have kept the secret to myself. Now he's barely speaking to me, and I feel like I've destroyed our relationship. Some of my friends are on my side saying Tom deserved to know the truth, but others think I should have kept the secret, especially since Richard is no longer alive to defend himself. I feel terrible about how everything turned out, but I also don't think I could have lived with myself if I'd kept the truth from Tom. Am I the asshole for telling my husband the truth about his father after 10 years of marriage? After posting this, I had a long conversation with Tom about why I felt the way I did. I told him that while I understood why he was upset, I thought he deserved to know the truth about his father. I also explained that I didn't tell him to hurt him. I told him because I thought it was the right thing to do. Tom eventually came around and apologized for lashing out at me. He said he was just in shock and that he needed time to process everything. We've since had several long conversations about Richard, and Tom has started to see his father in a new light. It's been hard for him, but he's grateful that I told him the truth. The situation with Richard has been a recurring issue in our marriage. It's not just about the affair. It's about the way Tom has always idolized his father and put him on a pedestal. Richard was the kind of man who seemed perfect, and Tom has spent years trying to live up to his legacy. Finding out that Richard was flawed, and deeply so, has been a huge blow to Tom's sense of identity. I've tried to talk to Tom about how all of this makes me feel, but he doesn't seem to get it. He says things like, "Why did you have to tell me this?" and "I wish I could go back to not knowing." But it's not just about the affair. It's about the way Tom has always seen his father, and the way this revelation has shattered that image. Telling Tom the truth was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I feel like it was the right one. I'm hopeful that, in time, Tom will come to see that I told him because I love him and want him to know the truth no matter how painful it is. It's not the outcome I wanted, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction. Am I the asshole for refusing to donate bone marrow to my estranged brother after he abandoned our family? 29F, have a complicated relationship with my older brother, Chris, 32M. Growing up, Chris was the golden child, smart, athletic, and charming. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, bookish younger sister who always felt like I was living in his shadow. Despite our differences, we were close as kids. But everything changed when Chris turned 18. Chris left home the day he graduated high school and cut off all contact with our family. He didn't even say goodbye. He just packed his bags and left. We later found out he'd moved across the country to live with his girlfriend at the time. He didn't call, didn't write, and didn't come back for holidays or special occasions. It was like he'd erased us from his life. My parents were devastated. They tried reaching out to Chris over the years, but he never responded. He didn't come home when our dad had a heart attack, and he didn't show up for our mom's funeral 2 years ago. It was like he didn't care about us at all. Fast forward to now, I got a call from Chris out of the blue. He said he'd been diagnosed with leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant. He asked if I would get tested to see if I was a match. I was shocked. After years of silence, he was reaching out because he needed something from me. I agreed to get tested, mostly out of curiosity. But when the results came back and I found out I was a match, I didn't know what to do. On one hand, Chris is my brother, and I don't want him to die. On the other hand, he abandoned our family and hasn't been there for us when we needed him. Why should I go through a painful and invasive procedure for someone who couldn't even be bothered to call when our mom died? I told Chris I wouldn't donate my bone marrow. I said, "You left us. You didn't care about us when we needed you, so why should I care about you now?" He was furious. He called me selfish and heartless, and he said I was letting him die, out of spite. Now, some of our extended family members are reaching out, saying I'm being too harsh and that I should forgive Chris because he's family. But I don't see it that way. Chris hasn't been family to me in over a decade. He made it clear that he didn't want anything to do with us, and now he's only reaching out because he needs something. I feel like I'm standing up for myself and my parents, but I also feel guilty. Am I the asshole for refusing to donate bone marrow to my estranged brother? After posting this, I had a long conversation with my therapist about the situation. She helped me unpack my feelings and reminded me that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. She also suggested I think about what I would need from Chris in order to forgive him, if that's something I even want. I also talked to Chris again, trying to explain why I feel the way I do. I told him that while I don't want him to die, I can't ignore the years of hurt and abandonment. I said I needed time to process everything before I could even think about helping him. He didn't take it well. He accused me of being dramatic and said, "It was years ago. Why can't you just let it go?" His reaction made me realize that he hasn't really taken responsibility for what he did. He still sees himself as the victim, and that's not something I'm willing to tolerate. I've decided to keep my distance for now, even though it's been hard. Some of my friends have suggested I help him find other resources like donor registries or clinical trials, and I'm considering that as a compromise. The situation with Chris has been a recurring issue in my life. It's not just about the bone marrow. It's about the way he's always prioritized himself over everyone else. Growing up, Chris was the kind of person who would do whatever he wanted, no matter who it hurt. He would lie, cheat, and manipulate to get his way, and he never seemed to care about the consequences. When he left home, it felt like a betrayal. He didn't just leave. He abandoned us. He didn't care about how much it hurt our parents. And he didn't care about how much it hurt me. He just disappeared like we didn't matter to him at all. Finding out he needed my help after all these years was a shock. Part of me wanted to help him, just because he's my brother. But another part of me couldn't forget everything he's done. I kept thinking about all the times he wasn't there for us, and I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. Refusing to donate my bone marrow was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I feel like it was the right one. I'm finally starting to heal from the hurt Chris caused, and I don't want to open old wounds by letting him back into my life. It's not the outcome I wanted, but I feel like it's a step in the right direction. Am I the asshole for refusing to let my sister adopt my daughter after I found out she's been lying to me for years? I, 33F, have a complicated relationship with my younger sister, Lily, 30F. Growing up, Lily was the wild child, always getting into trouble, skipping school and causing chaos. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the one who always had to clean up her messes. Despite our differences, we've always been close, or at least I thought we were. 2 years ago, I found out I was pregnant. It was unplanned and the father wasn't in the picture, but I was determined to make it work. Lily was thrilled when I told her. She offered to help me with the baby and even said she'd be the best aunt ever. I was grateful for her support, especially since our parents live across the country and couldn't be there for me. When my daughter Emma was born, Lily was there for me every step of the way. She helped me with late-night feedings, babysat when I needed a break, and even bought Emma her first birthday presents. I thought we were closer than ever. But then, a few months ago, I found out something that shattered everything. I was going through Lily's phone to find a photo she'd taken of Emma when I stumbled across a text conversation with a guy named Jake. At first, I thought it was just a casual fling, but as I kept reading, I realized it was much more serious. Lily had been lying to me for years. Turns out Lily had been in a relationship with Jake for over 3 years. They'd been living together, and Lily had even been talking about starting a family with him. But the worst part? Jake was married. Lily had been having an affair with a married man, and she'd been lying to me about it the whole time. I was furious. How could she do something like that? How could she lie to me for years? I confronted Lily, and she admitted everything. She said she didn't tell me because she knew I'd judge her, and she didn't want to lose me. I told her I needed space and that I couldn't trust her anymore. A few weeks later, Lily called me with a shocking request. She said she and Jake had broken up, and she wanted to adopt Emma. She said she'd always wanted to be a mom, and she thought this was her chance. I was stunned. How could she even ask me that after everything she'd done? I told Lily no. I said I couldn't trust her to be a good role model for Emma, and I didn't want her anywhere near my daughter. Lily was devastated. She called me selfish and said I was punishing her for her mistakes. Now, some of our family members are reaching out, saying I'm being too harsh and that I should give Lily a chance, but I don't see it that way. Lily lied to me for years, and I can't just forget that. I feel like I'm protecting my daughter, but I also feel guilty. Am I the asshole for refusing to let my sister adopt my daughter after I found out she's been lying to me for years? After posting this, I had a long conversation with my therapist about the situation. She helped me unpack my feelings and reminded me that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. She also suggested I think about what I would need from Lily in order to rebuild our relationship if that's something I even want. I also talked to Lily again, trying to explain why I feel the way I do. I told her that while I love her, I can't ignore the years of lies and betrayal. I said I needed time to process everything before I could even think about letting her back into my life. She didn't take it well. She accused me of being dramatic and said, "It was years ago. Why can't you just let it go?" Her reaction made me realize that she hasn't really taken responsibility for what she did. She still sees herself as the victim, and that's not something I'm willing to tolerate. I've decided to keep my distance for now, even though it's been hard. Some of my friends have suggested I help her find other resources like affordable housing or job training programs, and I'm considering that as a compromise.